Have you ever wondered if objects could hold memories? Not just remind us of them, but actually contain them, like tiny worlds waiting to be discovered. Tonight, I want to share something extraordinary with you. Something that changed the way I see the simplest things around us. It started with a quilt, not just any quilt, but one that would teach me that sometimes the most magical things hide in the most ordinary places. It was a Thursday evening when I first noticed something unusual about my grandmother's quilt. The rain was tapping gently against the window, creating that perfect rhythm that makes you want to curl up somewhere warm. I was staying at her old cottage for the summer, helping her sort through decades of collected treasures. You know how grandmothers are. Every item has a story. Every photograph deserves 20 minutes of explanation. But that evening, she was unusually quiet as she pulled out an old trunk from the attic. The trunk creaked open, like it was yawning after a very long sleep. Inside, wrapped in lavender-scented tissue paper, was the most beautiful quilt I'd ever seen. Each square was different. Some had delicate embroidery of flowers, others showed tiny scenes of houses and trees, and a few seemed to shimmer with threads I couldn't quite identify. Were they silver, gold, or something else entirely? This, grandmother said, her voice soft as velvet, is not just a quilt. It's a collection of moments. She ran her weathered fingers across a patch, showing a small red bicycle. Every square holds a memory, preserved like a photograph, but so much more. Would you like to see? Now, I thought she meant she'd tell me stories about each patch. But what happened next? Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever touched something and felt like you were falling into it? Not physically falling, but something deeper, like your consciousness was being gently pulled into another place and time. Grandmother took my hand and placed it on that bicycle patch. The world around me began to shimmer and blur, like looking through water. The cottage faded, and suddenly I could smell summer. Not just any summer, but a specific one. Fresh-cut grass mixed with the metallic scent of a new bicycle. The kind that makes your nose tingle. I heard laughter, young and bright, and realized with a start that it was my grandmother's voice. But decades younger, I was standing in a sun-drenched yard, watching a young girl with pigtails learning to ride that red bicycle. Her father, my great-grandfather, whom I'd only seen in sepia photographs, was running beside her, his hands hovering near the seat, ready to catch her if she fell. "You're flying, Rosie," he called out. "You're absolutely flying." The joy in that moment was so pure, so complete, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. But here's the fascinating part. I wasn't just watching this memory. I could feel the nervousness in little Rosie's stomach, the way it fluttered like butterflies. I could sense her determination, that fierce concentration as she gripped the handlebars. The neuroscientists would probably say it's impossible. But I swear, I could even taste the lemonade she'd been drinking earlier. Tart and sweet on my tongue. Just as suddenly as it began, the vision faded. I was back in the cottage, my hand still on the quilt, grandmother watching me with knowing eyes. "How?" was all I managed to whisper. She smiled that mysterious smile, grandmother's perfect over decades of keeping secrets. Some things, dear one, don't need explaining. They need experiencing. This quilt has been in our family for generations. Each woman adds her own patches, her own memories. The thread we use, well, let's just say it comes from a very special place. Think about that for a moment. Every family has heirlooms. But what if some of them are more than just objects? What if they're archives of human experience, waiting for the right person to unlock them? Grandmother moved my hand to another patch, this one showing a simple kitchen table with a cake. "This one," she said, "is from my mother, your great-grandmother Margaret." The shift was gentler this time, like sinking into a warm bath. I found myself in a kitchen from the 1940s, complete with a wood-burning stove and checkered curtains. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air. A woman who looked remarkably like my grandmother was pulling a cake from the oven. But her face was creased with worry, not celebration. "It's going to be perfect," a young girl said from the corner. I recognized her as my grandmother, perhaps 8 years old. "Daddy will love it when he comes home from the war." The woman, Margaret, set the cake down with shaking hands. "If he comes home," she whispered, so quietly the little girl didn't hear. But then something beautiful happened. The little girl walked over and hugged her mother's waist. "He will, Mama. I know he will. And when he does, this cake will be waiting. We'll keep making them until he comes back." The determination in that child's voice, the hope that refused to be extinguished. It hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a memory of baking a cake. This was a memory of choosing hope over fear, of finding sweetness in the midst of uncertainty. How many of us need that reminder right now, in our own uncertain times? The scene dissolved, and I was back again, feeling slightly dizzy. "Did he come back?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from family stories. 6 months later, grandmother confirmed, and yes, there was a cake waiting, the 17th one she'd made. She chuckled softly. Mother got quite good at that recipe. Can you imagine the patience that took 17 cakes, each one an act of faith? It makes our modern complaints about waiting for Amazon packages seem rather silly, doesn't it? I reached for another patch on my own, this time drawn to one that showed a full moon over water. Grandmother nodded encouragingly. This memory was different, older somehow, like looking through amber. I was by a lake I didn't recognize, under stars so bright they seemed fake to my modern eyes. A young woman sat on a dock, her feet dangling in the water. She was humming something, a lullaby maybe, and writing in a journal by moonlight. "Choose joy," she wrote, the words appearing on the page as I watched. Even when the world gives you every reason not to. Choose joy because it's rebellion against darkness. Choose joy because it's the only thing they can't take from you. I wanted to know more about this woman, what had happened to make her write those words with such conviction, but the memory was already fading, leaving me with just the echo of her humming and the sensation of cool water on feet that weren't mine. Who was she? I asked grandmother. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. That patch was already here when my mother inherited the quilt. Some memories come without names, just wisdom. Those might be the most important ones. We continued through the quilt, patch by patch, memory by memory. There was the wedding dance where my grandparents met. I felt the nervous excitement as their hands touched for the first time. Heard the big band music that made everything feel like a movie. There was the moment my mother was born, the overwhelming rush of love and terror that comes with holding your firstborn. Did you know that feeling has a texture? It does. It feels like silk and sandpaper at the same time, smooth and rough, comfortable and challenging all at once. One patch showed a garden in full bloom. When I touched it, I found myself kneeling in rich soil, planting seeds with hands that belonged to someone many generations back. Each seed, a voice said, though I couldn't see the speaker, is a promise to the future. We plant not for ourselves, but for those we'll never meet. How often do we think about that? Every action we take ripples forward through time. The tree you plant today might shade someone's great-grandchild. The kindness you show might inspire someone to pass it on, creating a chain reaction of goodness that outlasts you by centuries. But not all the memories were gentle. One patch, darker than the others, showed a storm cloud. When I touched it, I was thrust into a moment of profound loss. A woman stood at a grave, rain mixing with her tears. The pain was so sharp I gasped, but then I felt something else. The presence of others around her, hands on her shoulders, arms supporting her when her knees buckled. The memory wasn't just about loss, it was about how we carry each other through the unbearable moments. Why keep the sad ones? I asked grandmother when I emerged from that memory, feeling raw and somehow cleaner, like I'd been crying tears that weren't mine, but needed to be shed anyway, because, she said, adjusting her glasses, joy without sorrow is just noise. It's the hard times that give the good times their sweetness. And someone needs to remember that we survive. We always survive. Here's something they don't teach you in school. Memories aren't just about the past. They're instructions for the future. Every patch on that quilt was someone saying, this is how you love. This is how you hope. This is how you grieve. This is how you continue. As the evening grew later and the rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows, I found myself drawn to a patch near the corner. It was newer than many of the others, showing a computer keyboard with flowers growing between the keys. "That's mine," grandmother said with a hint of pride. "From when I learned to email my instructor said I was hopeless, but I wanted to talk to my granddaughter in Japan. When I touched it, I felt the frustration of fingers that had spent decades on typewriters trying to understand this new magic. But stronger than the frustration was determination, and stronger still was love. Love that said distance doesn't matter, age doesn't matter, technology doesn't matter. What matters is connection. I felt the triumph when that first email went through. The joy when the reply came back seconds later from halfway around the world. Funny how we take instant communication for granted now, isn't it? But for someone who grew up with letters that took weeks to arrive, that first email was nothing short of miraculous. "I want to add a patch," I said suddenly. The words surprised me, but as soon as I said them, I knew they were true. Grandmother's face lit up. "I was hoping you'd say that, but choose carefully. The memory you add becomes part of the quilt story forever. It should be something that teaches, something that helps, something that matters." I thought about all the moments in my life that felt significant. Graduations. First job. First heartbreak. They all seemed somehow too small, too personal. Then I remembered something. "Last year," I said slowly, "I was on the subway when an elderly man collapsed. Everyone just stood there, frozen, including me. But then, this teenager, couldn't have been more than 16, pushed through everyone and started CPR. She saved his life, while the rest of us adults just watched. When the paramedics arrived and took over, she disappeared into the crowd before anyone could thank her. I never even learned her name." Grandmother nodded slowly. "And what did that teach you?" That heroism doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a cape or wait for permission. Sometimes it wears headphones and a backpack and does what needs doing while everyone else is still processing. "That," grandmother said, pulling out a wooden box filled with threads that seemed to contain their own light, "is exactly the kind of memory this quilt needs." The process of adding a patch was unlike anything I'd experienced. First, grandmother had me close my eyes and recall every detail of that moment. The fluorescent lights of the subway car, the smell of coffee someone had spilled, the sudden thud when the man fell, the way time seemed to stop. But more than the physical details, she had me recall the feelings. My paralysis, my shame at that paralysis, my awe at the girl's instant action, and the way it changed how I saw courage. "Now," grandmother said, handing me a needle threaded with that strange, luminous thread, "you sew not with your hands but with your intention. Each stitch captures not just what happened, but what it meant." Is it strange to say that sewing can be a form of magic? Because that's what it felt like. With each stitch, I felt the memory transferring from my mind to the fabric. The patch began to take shape. A simple scene of hands pressed against the chest. A heart between them, surrounded by watching eyes. It wasn't elaborate like some of the other patches, but it held the entire story. When I finished, my patch looked like it had always been part of the quilt, like it was exactly where it needed to be. Grandmother had me touch it, and sure enough, I was back in that subway car, but this time I could feel everyone's experience of that moment. The man's confusion and fear. The girl's determination despite her own terror. The crowd's collective shame, and then inspiration. It was the same memory, but prismatic now, seen from every angle. The quilt chooses which memories become part of it, grandmother explained. Not every moment can be preserved this way, only the ones that serve a purpose, that have something to teach. We spent the rest of the evening going through more patches. There was one showing a man teaching his daughter to fish, patience made tangible. Another showed women marching for the right to vote, courage in numbers, each person drawing strength from the others. A patch near the center showed two hands clasping across a divide. A moment of forgiveness that took 40 years to arrive, but changed everything when it did. You might be wondering if this is all metaphorical, if I'm just using fancy language to describe looking at an old quilt and imagining stories. I wondered that too, especially after I left grandmother's cottage and returned to my regular life. But then something happened that convinced me otherwise. 3 weeks after that evening with the quilt, I was struggling with a decision at work. Should I speak up about something unethical I'd witnessed, risking my job, or stay quiet and safe? I was paralyzed with indecision, losing sleep, making myself sick with worry. Then one night, I dreamed about the quilt. In the dream, I touched a patch I hadn't examined that evening, one showing a candle in a window. In the memory, a woman was placing a candle in her window during what I somehow knew was the Underground Railroad era. Her husband stood behind her, worried. "They'll know," he said. "They'll know we're helping them." "Good," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Let them know. Some things are worth the risk." I woke up with absolute clarity about what I needed to do. The next day, I reported what I'd witnessed. And yes, it did cost me my job. But it also led to an investigation that protected dozens of people from harm. Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice. But the quilt's memories remind us that people have been making hard right choices throughout history. We're not alone in our struggles. Have you ever noticed how we often feel like we're the first ones to face our particular challenges? Like no one else has ever been this scared, this uncertain, this overwhelmed? But that's the beautiful lie of isolation. The truth is, every emotion you've felt, someone else has felt before. Every challenge you face, someone has faced a version of it. The quilt taught me that we're all part of a much larger story, each of us adding our own patches to the grand design. Grandmother called me last month with news that made my heart sink. She was ill, the kind of ill that doesn't get better. "I need you to come," she said simply. "It's time." I drove through the night, afraid I'd be too late, but I found her sitting up in bed, the quilt spread across her lap, looking more vibrant than she had in years. "I'm not dying yet," she said with a laugh at my expression, "but it's time you understood the rest." She had me sit beside her and place both hands on the quilt. This time, instead of individual memories, I felt all of them at once, a symphony of human experience playing through my consciousness. Love, loss, triumph, defeat, ordinary Tuesdays, extraordinary adventures. All of it mixing together into something that felt like understanding life itself. "The quilt," grandmother said, "doesn't belong to our family. We're just its current guardians. One day, you'll know who to pass it to. They might be family, or they might be a stranger who needs these memories more than we do. The quilt will tell you." "But how will I know?" I asked, feeling the weight of this responsibility. "The same way you knew which memory to add. You'll just know." She then told me the quilt's origin story, or at least as much as she knew. It began centuries ago, with a woman who lost everything in a fire: her home, her possessions, all the photographs and letters that connected her to her past. In her grief, she began sewing, trying to recreate what was lost. They say she sewed for 7 days and 7 nights without stopping. And when she finished, she had created something impossible, a quilt that could hold not just the image of memories, but their essence. Was she a witch? I asked, half joking. "Does it matter?" Grandmother replied. "Witch, artist, genius, lucky accident, the label doesn't change what the quilt does. It preserves what matters. It teaches what needs teaching. It connects us across time and space." That's when she showed me something I hadn't noticed before. The backing of the quilt had words embroidered in threads so fine you had to know where to look. They were in different languages, different hands, added over the years, but they all said variations of the same thing: remember, learn, continue. Every guardian adds their own words, grandmother said. What will yours be? I'm still thinking about that. What words would you add? What instruction would you leave for future guardians of something this precious? But here's what strikes me most about the quilt. It's not passive. It doesn't just store memories, it shares them. It takes the personal and makes it universal. That teenager saving a life on the subway, that memory doesn't just belong to me anymore. Someday, someone else will touch that patch and learn what I learned about courage. They'll feel what I felt, and maybe, when their moment comes, they'll be the one who acts instead of freezes. Isn't that what all good stories do? They take specific experiences and make them universal. They say, this happened to me, but it could happen to you. And here's what I learned, so maybe you won't have to learn it the hard way. The quilt now sits in my apartment, carefully preserved in a climate-controlled chest. Sometimes I take it out just to run my fingers over the patches, not entering the memories, but just feeling their presence. It's comforting, knowing that all these lives, all these experiences, are woven together in one object. We talk a lot about being connected through technology, through social media, but this is different. This is connection through story, through experience, through the fundamental human act of remembering and sharing. Last week, something extraordinary happened. I was showing the quilt to a friend, telling her about its properties. She was skeptical, but curious. When her hand brushed against a patch I'd never paid attention to before, it showed a simple doorway. She gasped and jerked her hand back. "That's my grandmother's house," she whispered. "But how? My family isn't connected to yours." We carefully explored that patch together, and what we discovered challenged everything I thought I knew about the quilt. The memory was of her grandmother as a young woman, standing in that doorway, making a decision to leave everything behind and start fresh in a new country. But here's the thing. My friend's grandmother had never met anyone in my family. There was no connection we could find. That's when I realized the quilt wasn't just collecting memories from one family line. It was somehow gathering important moments from many lives, many families, creating a tapestry of human experience that transcended bloodlines. The women who had been its guardians hadn't just been adding their own memories, they'd been channels for memories that needed preserving. Whether they knew the people or not, think about the implications of that. Somewhere, somehow, there's a force or intelligence that decides which memories matter enough to preserve, which moments of human experience need to be saved for future generations. Is it conscious? Is it random? Is it something beyond our understanding? I don't have answers, only questions that keep me awake at night in the best possible way. My friend's discovery led to an experiment. We invited others to touch the quilt, people from different backgrounds, different families. About 1 in 10 found a patch that resonated with their own family history. A man found his father's memory of building their family home. A woman discovered her aunt's first day of teaching. Each time, the memory was something pivotal, something that had shaped not just that person, but generations after them. We're documenting these discoveries now, creating a map of the quilt's memories. It's revealing patterns I never expected. Memories of courage appear in clusters, usually from times of great societal upheaval. Memories of love are evenly distributed, like anchors holding everything else in place. Memories of loss almost always adjoin memories of recovery, as if the quilt itself is saying, yes, this happened, but look what came next. There's one patch that no one has been able to access yet. It's in the very center of the quilt, older than all the others, showing simply a tree with roots that seem to go on forever. Grandmother said she'd never been able to enter that memory, nor had her mother or grandmother. Maybe, she said, it's waiting for the right person, or the right time. What would you find if you touched that patch? What memory is so important, so fundamental, that it sits at the heart of all the others? Sometimes I lie awake imagining possibilities. The first human to show kindness to a stranger. The moment someone discovered how to preserve stories. The instant when someone realized that we're all connected, all part of the same vast human family. But perhaps, the mystery is the point. Perhaps some things should remain unknown, pulling us forward with curiosity and wonder. After all, isn't that what keeps us going? The belief that there's still magic to discover? Still stories to uncover? Still connections to make? The quilt has taught me that memories aren't just about the past, they're about possibility. Every memory in that quilt represents a choice someone made. A moment when they could have gone left, but went right. Stayed silent, but spoke up. Given up, but held on. And those choices ripple forward, inspiring others, teaching others. Showing us that we too can choose courage, choose love, choose hope. You know what's funny? When I started telling you this story, I thought I was sharing something about my grandmother's quilt. But now, I realize I'm sharing something about all of us. We're all living quilts, aren't we? Every experience we have becomes a patch in our personal tapestry. Every person we meet adds a thread. Every story we hear becomes part of our pattern. The difference is, most of us don't have magical thread to preserve our memories. We have something else though. We have the ability to share our stories, to pass them on, to weave them into the larger human narrative. Every time you tell someone about a moment that changed you, you're adding a patch to the invisible quilt that connects us all. So here's my question for you. As we near the end of this story, what patch would you add? If you could preserve one memory, one moment, one lesson for future generations, what would it be? Not your biggest achievement or your happiest day necessarily, but the moment that taught you something essential about being human, and more importantly, who needs to hear that story? Who in your life is struggling with something that your experience could illuminate? Because that's the real magic, not a quilt that holds memories, but people who share them, who say, I've been there too, and here's what I learned. The quilt remains with me, a responsibility and a gift. Sometimes I wonder if I'm worthy of being its guardian, if I understand enough to protect something this precious. But then I remember what grandmother said. The quilt doesn't choose perfect people. It chooses people who are willing to remember, willing to learn, and willing to share. I'm still adding patches, still discovering memories that were already there. Last night, I found one showing a child drawing on a cave wall. Humanity's first attempt to say, I was here, and this is what I saw. It reminded me that we've always been trying to preserve our stories. Always been fighting against the forgetting that time brings. And that's what you're doing too, isn't it? Every time you listen to a story like this, every time you share your own experiences, every time you remember something that matters, you're adding to the great quilt of human memory. You're saying that these moments, these feelings, these lessons are worth preserving. The rain has stopped now, and dawn is beginning to break outside my window. The quilt lies beside me, its patches catching the first light of day. Each square seems to glow softly, as if the memories inside are stirring, ready to teach someone new, ready to connect another heart to the vast web of human experience. Before you go, let me share one last thing. After grandmother passed peacefully, with the quilt across her lap and a smile on her face, I found a note she'd left for me. It said, "The quilt remembers, so we don't forget. But more importantly, it reminds us that no feeling is truly singular, no experience truly isolated. We are all threads in the same tapestry, all patches in the same quilt." Remember that when you feel alone, I think about that note every day. In a world that often feels disconnected, where we're all staring at our individual screens, living our individual lives, the quilt reminds me that connection isn't just possible, it's inevitable. We're already connected through the stories we share, the memories we preserve, the wisdom we pass on. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, maybe think about your own patches, your own memories that deserve preserving. Think about the stories your grandparents told you, the lessons hidden in ordinary moments, the threads that connect you to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. And if you found value in this story, if it made you think or feel or remember something important, I'd be honored if you'd share it with someone else. Subscribe to hear more stories like this one, stories that remind us of the magic hidden in everyday life. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next tale. And leave a comment sharing what patch you'd add to the quilt. I read every single one, and your stories often become the seeds for new episodes. Remember, you're not just a listener or a viewer. You're a keeper of stories, a guardian of memories, a thread in the beautiful, complex, ever-growing quilt of human experience. Sleep well, dream deep, and know that your story matters more than you might ever realize. Until next time, this is your storyteller, reminding you that the most magical things often come disguised as ordinary objects, waiting patiently for someone to discover the wonders they hold. Sweet dreams, dear friends, and may your own memories be worth preserving for generations to come.